I've contrasted the common sense view, where virtues have opposites, which are vices, with Aristotle's view, which is that they are means between extremes. They're really two associated vices. For example, cowardice and rashness, in the case of courage. Or when we get more precise about it, we recognize there are actually two dimensions. It's a matter of courage being in the middle of these two dimensions. On the one dimension, you can be cowardly, but you can also be too fearless. In the other dimension, you can lack confidence, but you can also be overconfident. Now, Valla thinks there's something wrong with that picture. And so he tries to substitute a more common sense view, in a way, but a combination of things. It's not a matter of being at the center of these things, being means between extremes. Instead, he says, it's having the virtue in different dimensions. So here is how it goes. When we look at courage, he says, there are at least two things going on. First of all, he draws a distinction between bravery and courage. He says there is the matter of bravery as opposed to cowardice. And so there is one dimension there, but there is another dimension. And in this case, he doesn't say it's a matter of confidence. It's a matter of, well, proper deliberation. And so he says here, the combination is between bravery and caution. The courageous person is brave, but also appropriately cautious. They've thought it through. They're doing this after some degree of deliberation. Now, often we think, well, wait a minute, the person who acts really quickly is extremely virtuous, is very courageous. And he says, in a way, that's right, but it's because they have faced this kind of situation before. They have some kind of reaction, and even though it happens fast, there is some very quick assessment of the situation, a very quick decision about what to do. And so it's not as if acting quickly is really incompatible with caution. But there is an opposite of caution. That's what rashness is. So rashness isn't really a matter of being overconfident so much as not undertaking due deliberation, not thinking it through. And so let's think about somebody who does react very quickly. Think about a police officer, for example, in the line of duty, who reacts to danger by seeking out the danger, going toward the danger, and then acting very quickly. That's a courageous thing to do. But Valla says it's not a matter of controlling fear to the appropriate extent. It's certainly a matter of, yes, not letting fear overcome you, but it's also a matter of dealing with the situation in the appropriate way and responding in a way that you've thought through. Now, in the police officer's case, it may be something they think through at the time. They may well have the time in this engagement to think about what to do and assess the situation carefully, but it may have to be a split-second decision. And in that case, the training of a police officer helps them to respond quickly, to immediately see what ought to be done in that situation. Something similar happens in the military, but something similar can happen to a trader, for example, on a trading floor. Dealing with stocks or bonds or options, they have to make a decision very quickly about what to do, buy, sell, hold their position, and so on. And there's a lot of danger there. In that case, financial danger, not physical danger, but still, often they have to act very quickly. That doesn't mean that they're doing this rashly, because after all, they've got the experience to face this situation multiple times, and they approach it at the outset with some idea of how to think about these things. So it doesn't necessarily mean taking a lot of time in the moment. It may be the kind of thing that people do quite quickly, but on the basis of something that's happened before. Now, Aristotle would say, well, that's what I meant by practical wisdom. And so, with respect to courage, I don't think it's that easy to distinguish Aristotle's position from Valla's. Both really, in the end, say, look, it's a question of this, well, two-dimensional array, and then do we divide up the dimensions in 2 or 3 segments? Well, you can end up saying, I don't think there's a lot of difference here between caution and practical wisdom. Maybe in the end they come to the same thing. But I don't think it's so easy to assimilate the views if we think about other virtues. So let's take some examples. Aristotle says that temperance is a virtue that is in between 2 extremes, 2 vices. One of them, is self-indulgence. That's the most obvious one, the common sense opposition. But the other one, he says, is insensibility. In effect, suppressing your concern for your own fulfillment, fulfilling your own desires too much. That he rejects as well. Now, Valla says, I don't think that's the right picture here. It's not a one-dimensional thing. In fact, there are two different dimensions that we have to think about. What are the dimensions? Well, first of all, there is a question of self-control as opposed to self-indulgence. Each of us probably is weak-willed in face of certain things. We find it very hard to control ourselves. It's different things for different people. But Aristotle says the vice on the other side is insensibility. In effect, suppressing your desires too much. Well, Valla says there is something like that going on, but it's a different dimension entirely. It's not a question of a mean between extremes. Instead, there are two things you have to think about when you think about self-control. One is, yes, the most obvious thing, controlling desires. But the other thing is different. It's a question of developing the right kind of sensibility. And so he says there, insensibility, what Aristotle's talking about there, that's the opposite of having a proper sensibility. It's a matter of being sensitive to the right kinds of things. And so the person who indulges themselves and eats lots and lots of M&Ms or drinks lots and lots of alcohol or whatever it is, the problem there is only partly that they don't control their desire enough. The problem is partly that they don't have enough concern for things they ought to be concerned about. They don't have enough concern for their own health, for their own well-being, for perhaps the well-being of people around them. And so when we think about different desires, we realize it can be different things you have to be sensitive to in different desires. You have to think about not only controlling that desire, but also valuing something else enough that it gives you a reason to control that desire. And so, yes, sensibility is involved, but it's a different kind of thing. You've got to control your hunger, let's say, or your desire for that candy, but you also have to be concerned enough in a positive way for your health. And so here he is saying, really, often the best response, the best way to get you to become more virtuous isn't to suppress to a greater degree that hunger or that desire for that food. It's to increase your concern for something else that is competing value. Now that, I think, is consistent throughout Valla's approach to this. Aristotle wants you to, typically at least, suppress to a greater degree. And Valla is saying, no, it's a matter of making you more sensitive to the things you ought to care about. I don't want to make you less hungry. Valla is in effect saying, I want to make you more concerned about your health. And that kind of theme is something that runs throughout. And we can go back then to courage and see the way the difference manifests itself. He's in effect saying, I'm not telling you to suppress your fear to a greater degree or become more careful in the degree of confidence with which you approach a situation. Instead, what I'm saying is, you've got to value other things enough. And so, yes, you're going to be fearful facing dangerous situations. You're going to be fearful facing risks. But, he says, yes, you have to control that. However, there's something else. You have to be concerned enough in a positive way about positive things. After all, the police officer is going to face those dangers, not just for the thrill of it, but because the officer cares about other things enough to motivate him or her to get into those situations of danger. The same is true of a soldier. The same is going to be true of a financial trader. Now, in various ways, there are different things those people are concerned about. One might be concerned about justice and proper social order. One might be concerned for the survival of their country or just the welfare of the people around them. And others might be concerned for personal enrichment or all sorts of other things. But in any case, it's a question of having the positive value that will allow you to overcome your fear. It's not just, in other words, pushing the fear down, but having a reason to push it down. And you've got to value something else enough.